It's kind of a similar experience for me. I'm a little kid. I did some writing, and they're telling me that I'm washed up. I'm a has-been. I'm like, they're telling me I'll never work, as a writer again. But the bottom line is okay. You just go from their A list to their Z list, but you're still on the list. But you're not the first person to. But when they get desperate enough, you'll get that call. They'll come to you and say, okay, we're stuck. That has happened to me from time to time. It's funny because I had people who even hate my guts, offer me jobs as a writer, who said they never wanted anything to do with me ever at all again. And then, they asked me, to, particularly on science fiction, but, they asked, or at least feeling me out to see how I would feel with working with this person again. And I was like, no way! I'm sorry, I just dislike you too much to work with you. It's like no, the whole. Occasionally I've had that experience with other people, even named people that you would know, where I just said, no, I do not want to work with you. We really just dislike each other too much. We don't want to be in the same room together.
Well, then what's it like then, following that question, when you do actually see the work that is being presented on the screen, but you've written it? What's that like to see? You've written it.
That's always a magical moment for me. That really is.
Talk about that.
It's interesting whether it's a $200 million film or it's a thing that they shot for like $10,000. Or just, or something that they did on public access. Because I worked with some people in Brockton. They put together some short films, and I wrote some shorts for them. But it's always for me to see, how they would interpret my work, that I wrote, and how they might do it differently from what I had envisioned. And it amazes me sometimes when they really nail it. You see what I'm saying? When I look at it and I watch it, I'm like going, good job. Even if I would have done it maybe a little differently here or there, it's like it works for what it is. It's like they nailed it. They made it work. They made it happen. And that's always a great feeling. And it's like, yeah, it's worth all the other horrors and frustrations. For those few moments where you watch something and you say, yeah, good job, guys. You nailed it. You did a great job on that. It really makes me happy to see it come through. And to see something that you're really proud of up on the screen, whether it's the big screen or the small screen.
Right. And speaking of screen, let's go back to the movies. Let's go back to the whole thing of classics. You hear it all the time, classic. You had Alfred Hitchcock, made a lot of movies. Not many classics. How do some of these movies are considered classics? What goes into the classics? You've mentioned Alien.
Well,
classic.
basically,
by Northwest, classic.
Basically, a classic movie is a movie that's popular with the majority of the audience out there, and they consider it a classic. They consider it a masterpiece. And basically, it's a watermark film. It's a movie that sets a standard. It says, okay, it's like when Citizen Kane came out. Even though I'm not a huge Citizen Kane fan, but when it came out, and I will say this, it was the best American movie ever made up to that date. It was a watermark film. It set that standard. It's like, okay, this is the new standard. Rise to that and hopefully rise above it. That's what a classic is. And it's a movie where everything really comes together and just clicks, And it happens very rarely, even amongst your best filmmakers, my own feeling about Hitchcock is maybe in his lifetime he made about half a dozen films that were considered classics. He made some very good movies, other than the classics. Few turkeys, even he admits that. Waltz in Vienna, he said, was the worst film he ever made. He wished he never made it. Personally, I heard Jamaica Inn was pretty bad too, but hey, let's focus on the positive, not the negative.
All right. We are talking screenwriting tips. And I'm just going to toss this one out here. You suggest that aspiring screenwriters, work on your weaknesses and strengths. Explain that one.
Well, I think a mistake a lot of writers make is that they focus on their strengths as writers rather than working on their weaknesses to correct them and make them better. Jimmy Stringfield, a guy who was my literary agent for several years, he said about me as a writer, he says, you figure out what you're weak at and you get better at it. Because that's how you get better. You figure out what your weaknesses are. If you're weak on dialogue, you work on dialogue at it. If you're weak on story structure, you work on story structure, you get better at it. If you're weak at character development, you work on that and you get better on it. I mean, it's interesting because sometimes, I've had like creative spurts where it's like I just couldn't hold the story in. And I just, boom, got it out there, nailed it. And then, and it's interesting because a lot of times when I did that, it just clicked, it worked. And people recognized it as a great literary work.
Good, good. Get back to films again. One of your classic lines, and I think we've all heard it, I think you say here, both inspiration and perspiration make good films. Explain that, inspiration and perspiration.
Well, it's like what Albert Einstein said. He said it's 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration. And, I think there is truth to that. Being a good writer is about, hard work. It's about keep trying, keep writing, keep working on getting better as a writer. So, and occasionally you get those moments of inspiration where you nail it, you come up with something really good. But in order to get there, you have to have the perspiration too.
Well, yeah. I mean, you've mentioned that it takes two bad scripts to get the good one.
Well, yeah, and that's actually a pretty good trade-off, because a lot of people, they spend their whole lives writing bad scripts and never come up with a good one, or they spend, or they'll write, it's like some guys were saying they wrote 10 bad scripts before they got one they were willing to show to people that they thought was even good enough to show. Mm-hmm. So it's a hit and miss business. You've got to be willing to fall on your face. You've got to be willing to take that risk and go out there, stick your neck out and say, okay, I'm going to try something that hasn't been beaten to death already.
Yeah, inspiration and creative ideas sometimes are hard to come by. And, sometimes you just don't write anything for a while, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, that's happened to me a lot of times where I spent years without writing anything. That doesn't mean I didn't have ideas in my head, and I wasn't necessarily working on them in my head, but I wasn't pursuing writing. I wasn't typing anything out, and at times I wasn't even researching anything. A lot of people don't realize that I wrote a play called The Fall of Nero, and I was reading books on ancient Rome and Nero years before I sat down and I actually typed up the play. So I did my homework basically for 30 years. That was actually the first story I wanted to write as a kid. I wanted to tell Nero's story in a definitive way. The same way Shakespeare did with Julius Caesar. I wanted to be the one to tell Nero's story, that once people see this and it gets produced as a play or a movie, they're going to say, okay, this is it. This is Nero's story. This is the definitive story about that character, the same way Shakespeare did it with Julius Caesar.
Okay. Back to the business, back to the whole business of the whole, movies, maybe even television shows. Because, if you take the example of Batman the television show, huge hit, condemned by writers. But, when it comes
critics
to...
and
critics
and much of the public.
But then when you... your accountants, the people that sell
bankers.
advertising, they really don't care. It's only... the money talks.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's like, I was talking with the guy who wrote the show Batman, and he was, and he was saying, yeah, it made a lot of money, but, it didn't win any awards. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? This is a business, This is, the bottom line is, did you make money? And it's, and a lot of bankers and accountants very happy, and investors as well, That's ultimately that is your job.